Welcome to the Two Beans in a Pod.
Great to be diving in today.
Yeah, today we're getting into something pretty heavy, actually. It's the idea that war is a racket. And we want to be really clear up front. We're not tackling this as, a political debate.
No, definitely not. The focus is more on the human side of it.
Exactly, a human issue. We're looking at some video sources and really centering on the work of a very highly decorated military figure.
That's Smedley D. Butler, right. A major general in the U.S. Marine Corps. Retired, of course.
That's the one. Two-time Medal of Honor recipient. His speech and later his booklet, both called War is a Racket, are really the backbone of this discussion.
And coming from someone with his background, decades of service, multiple campaigns, it carries a certain weight, doesn't it?
It really does. His core argument, which was pretty explosive back then and still makes you think today, is that business interests, commercially benefit from war. War profiteering, basically.
Right. The idea that maybe the stated reasons for conflict aren't always the whole story.
Precisely. And it's not just an old idea. We saw that clip of Joe Rogan talking about Butler.
Yeah, I remember that.
Rogan was pointing out that Butler wrote this in the 1930s, saying that protecting bankers was a big driver for military action even then.
And Rogan described it as, eerily accurate for today?
Yeah, eerily accurate. Which, makes you pause.
And it connects to some more recent commentary, too, like Ben Cohen on that Tucker Carlson podcast.
Right, the Ben & Jerry's co-founder. What was his take?
Well, he directly referenced Butler. He was arguing, much like Butler did, that the motives behind wars, and especially the massive military spending we see, they're often more about profit than, say, humanitarian goals.
So you have this decorated general from the past and a modern business figure kind of saying similar things.
Pretty much, echoing that same core sentiment across the decades.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. To really unpack these perspectives, we want to understand the arguments, look at the evidence they present, and just explore this whole idea that war is a racket.
Sounds good. Where should we start? Maybe with Butler's definition.
Yeah, good idea. What did he actually mean by racket? Yeah. Because it's a strong word.
It is. And his definition is quite pointed. He basically says a racket is something that isn't what it seems to most people. It's run for the benefit of a very small group, the insiders, you could say, at the expense of the masses.
Okay.
And he argues war is the ultimate example, the oldest, maybe the most profitable, and definitely the most vicious racket of all.
Wow. And he contrasts the outcomes, doesn't he? The profits versus the costs.
Absolutely starkly, he puts it plainly. Profits are counted in dollars, losses are counted in lives. Full stop.
That really gets home.
And he backs it up with numbers, pointing to World War I specifically. He mentions that something like 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires popped up in the U.S. during that war, people who admitted it in their tax returns, these sort of blood gains.
21,000, that's staggering. And then he asks those questions, right, about those millionaires.
Yes, really powerful rhetorical questions like, how many of these guys actually carried a rifle? How many dug a trench? Went hungry? Faced enemy bullets, got wounded or killed.
The implication being very few, if any.
Precisely. The people making the money were far removed from the actual fighting and dying.
And it wasn't just personal wealth, was it? He talked about nations gaining territory, too.
He did, but he argued that even that benefit doesn't really go to the public.
How so?
Well, he says the new territories, the resources, they end up being exploited by the same small group that profited from the war in the first place.
Ah, okay. So the average person doesn't really see the benefit of new land.
Not according to Butler. What the public gets, he says, are the bills. The gravestones, the veterans with mangled bodies and shattered minds, the economic instability, the decades of taxes to pay for it all.
It's a grim picture. Did he always feel this way? Or was it something he realized later?
He actually mentions that it was something he suspected during his career, but it only fully hit him after he retired. Looking back, he saw the patterns.
Interesting. So it was hindsight combined with being out of the system.
Seems like it. And he was saying this even as tensions were building before World War II, warning that it's the people who foment the wars, the ones stirring the pot, who profit, not the ones who have to fight and pay.
Okay, let's pivot to Ben Cohen then. How does he bring this idea into the present day?
Cohen connects it very directly. He references Butler and applies that same racket lens to more recent conflicts, specifically mentioning the war in Ukraine.
Right.
He argues that a lot of conflicts and the refugee crises that follow often have roots in U.S. actions like overthrows or invasions that he believes were driven by profit motives, creating instability.
And he used that Butler quote, didn't he, about being muscle?
Yeah, high-class muscle for big business interests. Cohen uses that to really hammer home the alleged link between military power and corporate gain.
It's a provocative statement.
It is, and Cohen also takes a bit of a different stance than, say, the mainstream liberal view on supporting intervention in Ukraine.
What's his perspective there?
He suggests looking at the history, specifically NATO's expansion eastward after the Cold War. He argues that this expansion, possibly breaking promises made to Russia, helped provoke the current situation.
So he's urging a look at the context, the lead-up, not just the invasion itself.
Exactly. He's saying, maybe it's not quite as simple as just one aggressor and one victim. Let's consider the provocations, the history leading up to it. It pushes back against a potentially oversimplified narrative.
And like Butler, he talks about the cost, right? The financial cost.
Oh, absolutely. He really emphasizes the sheer scale of U.S. military spending, staggering amounts. And he asks, couldn't this money be used better here at home?
For things like housing, education.
Right. Housing, education, healthcare, basic needs. He even brings up Martin Luther King Jr.'s critique of the military-industrial complex, the idea of investing in communities, not conflicts.
Does he think lobbying politicians is the way to change things?
Actually, no. He seems pretty skeptical about lobbying. He puts more faith in grassroots movements, people organizing from the ground up. He even started a campaign, Common Sense of Defense, to try and raise public awareness about military spending.
So he sees a gap between what politicians prioritize and what people actually need.
That's definitely a key part of his argument. He thinks politicians are often afraid of looking weak on defense, so the military budget just keeps going up and up, almost automatically, regardless of actual need or what else that money could do.
And fundamentally for Cohen, it sounds like it's a moral issue, a question of values.
Yes, very much so. He questions the values driving U.S. foreign policy and spending. He advocates for focusing more on humanitarian aid, diplomacy, using America's strength to help people rather than just military projection.
Okay, let's go back to Butler for a moment, because he didn't just make claims, he gave some really concrete, almost shocking examples of profiteering during World War I.
Yeah, this is where his argument gets really specific and damning. He names names, gives figures, like DuPont, the powder company. Their average yearly profit before the war, around $6 million.
Okay.
During the war years. It averaged $58 million a year.
Wow. Almost 10 times higher.
Exactly. And it wasn't just munitions. Look at steel. Bethlehem Steel went from $6 million average yearly profit to $49 million. U.S. Steel more than doubled, from $105 million to $240 million.
So the core industries for war making saw massive gains.
Huge gains. Copper 2, Anaconda, Utah profit. Copper profits tripled, quadrupled. But it wasn't just them.
What other sectors did he mention?
Central Leather Company apparently saw profits jump 1,100% in just 1 year, 1916. Chemicals, General Chemical, 1,400% increase. Nickel, International Nickel, over 1,700%. Even sugar. American Sugar Refining Company saw their profits jump significantly.
It's just mind-boggling percentages across the board. Did he have official sources for this?
He did. He specifically mentions Senate document number 259. It looked into wartime profits and apparently found that anything under a 25% profit margin was considered unusual.
Unusual, 25%.
Yeah. He cites examples like coal companies making between 100 and, get this, 7,856% profit on their stock. Meat packers doubled or tripled their earnings.
And the bankers, the ones funding it all.
Butler suspected they made the most, the cream of the profits, as he put it. But their profits were often hidden within partnerships, not publicly reported like corporations, so it's harder to track the full extent.
Just incredible. And then he gets into the wasteful spending, right? The examples of just bizarre purchases.
Oh, yeah. This part is almost darkly comical. He talks about the government buying 35 million pairs of hobnailed shoes.
35 million. For how many soldiers?
For an army of about 4 million, that's like 8 or 9 pairs per soldier, when Butler said his own men often only had 1 pair.
That's insane. What else?
Hundreds of thousands of McClellan saddles for cavalry units that barely even went overseas. 20 million mosquito nets bought for France that never even got there.
Wait, they bought nets that didn't arrive.
Yep. And then apparently they ordered another 40 million yards of netting anyway.
Unbelievable.
And $1 billion spent on airplane engines that never flew, but the company still got paid.
It just sounds like pure waste and graft.
It does. He gives more examples. Undershirts costing 14 cents to make, bought for 30 or 40 cents. Those weird 48-inch wrenches, 12 dozen of them that only fit one specific nut somewhere near Niagara Falls.
A wrench for one nut.
Apparently. And 6,000 buckboards for kernels that were never used. And the ships. $3 billion spent on ships, including $635 million on wooden ships that were so madly built they couldn't even float.
Wooden ships that couldn't float. You can't make this stuff up.
According to Butler, you don't have to. So he adds it all up. What was the cost of World War I for the U.S.?
What was his estimate?
Around $52 billion total. Of that, about $39 billion was direct war spending. And out of that $39 billion, he calculated roughly $16 billion went straight into the pockets of profiteers.
$16 billion in profit from $39 billion spent. That's more than 40% profit margin overall for someone.
That's how he saw it, funding those 21,000 new millionaires and billionaires. He does mention the Senate Nye Committee looked into the munitions industry later, but he felt they barely scratched the surface.
Okay, just a quick reminder for everyone listening. If you're finding this exploration thought-provoking, please do hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our future deep dives.
Yeah, definitely helps us keep these conversations going.
So we've talked about who profits, according to Butler, but who pays the bills for all this?
Well, first and foremost, Butler says the public pays through taxes. That's obvious, right?
Right.
He also points out how bankers could manipulate things like Liberty bonds, buying them back cheap after pushing people to buy them high. But the biggest cost, he argues, the real bill, that's paid by the soldiers.
In what ways? Beyond the obvious risk of dying, I mean.
Beyond the ultimate price, yeah. He talks about visiting veterans' hospitals after the war, seeing, in his words, about 50,000 destroyed men.
Destroyed men. That's a powerful phrase.
It is. And he quotes a chief surgeon saying the death rate among veterans after the war was 3 times higher than for guys who stayed home.
3 times higher, so the war kept killing them even after they came back.
Exactly. The physical wounds, the mental toll. He describes young men taken from farms and offices, trained intensely to kill, and then just dropped back into civilian life with little support. He mentioned seeing 1,800 men in a hospital in Marion, Indiana, basically warehoused, some completely lost mentally.
It's heartbreaking. It wasn't just the physical and mental injuries, though, was it? There were other costs.
Oh, yeah. The heartbreak of leaving families behind, the rigid discipline of the camps, the misery of the trenches, mud, cold, rats, constant fear, being shot at day after day.
And the pay wasn't great either, right?
Terrible. He contrasts it with earlier wars where there might have been prize money or bonuses. In World War I, it was conscription, $30 a month. And even then, half might be automatically deducted for family support. Plus, they often forced soldiers to buy war insurance and those Liberty bonds.
Forced them to buy bonds, so they were paying for the war out of their tiny salaries.
Effectively, yes. Butler calls it the crowning insolence. He said many soldiers got to payday and received literally no cash because it all went to bond deductions.
And then what happened to those bonds?
After the war, when these guys came home, often broke and desperate, they frequently had to sell those same bonds back to the bankers or breakers at a loss, sometimes for as little as $84 for a $100 bond.
So they lost money on the forced investment.
Exactly. And of course, don't forget the families back home, the wives, mothers, children worrying constantly, struggling financially, and then dealing with the aftermath if their soldier came home wounded or didn't come home at all. They paid an immense price, too.
So if we try to sort of wrap this up, pull the threads together from Butler and Cohen, what's the main takeaway here?
Well, I think the core message that comes through really strongly is this perspective that war, at least as these sources describe it, functions like a racket.
Right.
A system where a very small number of people, corporations, financiers, make enormous profits.
While the costs.
The real costs, the devastating ones, are borne by the many.
Yeah.
Especially by the soldiers who fight paying with their lives, their health, their futures, and by the general public who fits the bill through taxes and deals with the long-term consequences.
And it's striking that this isn't a new fringe idea. It's coming from a highly decorated general almost 100 years ago, and it's still being discussed and applied today.
Absolutely. It really encourages you, doesn't it, to look critically at the reasons given for conflict, to ask, cui bono? Who benefits beyond the flags and the rhetoric? What are the underlying, maybe financial motivations?
Yeah. It leads to that final thought, maybe. Considering everything we've discussed, what responsibility do we as individuals have to really question the narratives around war, to try and understand who truly profits and who truly pays?
That's definitely something for all of us to reflect on. A heavy question.
It is. Well, if you found this deep dive insightful and want to explore more complex issues with us, please do hit that like button and subscribe to the channel.
We really appreciate you tuning in and thinking through these difficult topics with us.
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. If you are interested in the book War is a Racket, please order it from the link below.